I promised yesterday that I'd carry on with this little series concerning what's happening in Israel uh, with relation to the Palestinians. Because of the recent attacks from Gaza and the Israeli response, and how that fits in with prophecies. And I said there that we really need to look back in the Bible all the way back to the time of Abraham in the book of Genesis to see the origins for this continuing friction between the Jews and the Arabs, and who owns the land, and who really are the people of God. So I'm going to say, I said I'd do a second part for this, and I now think we need to do more than one part extra. So I was going to call this lecture A Tale of Two Cities, and the two cities are Jerusalem and Mecca. But I think there's so much needs to be said, I can't really cover it all in one episode. So I'm going to split this, and today I'm going to do Mecca, and hopefully tomorrow I'll do Jerusalem. Just stop that there. Now then, Mecca. What can I say about Mecca? Well, you all have heard of Mecca. It's the sacred city of the Muslims. And you're probably aware that every Muslim, at least once in his life, is required to go to Mecca. It's one of the requirements of Islam. And that's called the Hajj, or pilgrimage. And it's done in remembrance of Muhammad making a journey to Mecca from Medina, which is another city a bit further north. And you probably also know that when they go to Mecca, they put on white garments and they perambulate around and around a structure, a cubic structure known as the Kaaba. It's a sort of big tent, and they go round and round this structure, and in one corner of it there is a curious sort of gold moon-like shape with a stone or pieces of stone, black stone in it, and that stone is very, very holy in Islam, and people want to they want to touch it, they want to kiss it, they feel very much connected with this stone. It means a very, very great deal to them. And people have speculated, well, it's a black stone, it's probably a meteorite, and this is remains of a meteorite cult of Mecca. They've adopted, sort of pagan cult, been adopted as part of Islam. But I don't think that's the truth. I think there's a very different meaning to this, and it is actually central to understanding Islam. It's central to understanding the friction between the Jews and the Arabs, and it's central to understanding what Mecca really means. So we're going to look into this, and we're going to use the Bible. I have it on my Kindle, which is very handy because I can look things up relatively easily on this compared with a physical Bible. So anyway, I'm going to take you through this, and you'll understand that the origins of the Arabs are very similar to the origins of the Jews. They're all sons of Abraham. Abraham's the great figure of the past, the originator of the Abrahamic religions, which I told you are Judaism, Christianity and Islam. So they all have their connection back to Abraham, this great patriarch figure. And And why is he a patriarch figure? Because God called him out and made a contract with him. And I'm going to go through bits and pieces of that, but I'm going to take it in order to see where this goes. Now, the call of Abraham begins in Genesis 12. So I'm going to go back to that. Excuse me a minute while I sort this out. Now, I'm going to start this at the beginning of this chapter, and it's the start of everything, you can say, with regard to this Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, the Lord said to Abram, now he's called Abram at the first, and later his name is changed to Abraham. Abraham, I believe, means father of many nations. So anyway, he says to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So that's a pretty big thing, isn't it? Have God appear to you and tell you that you're going to be the father of many nations and a great blessing on the earth. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him. Lot went with him. Lot is his nephew. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So he's going from the city of Haran, where his father's moved. His father's called Terah. And Terah lives to 205 years old. Can you believe it? And I've been shown Terah's tomb in Haran, which is in southeast Turkey. Don't know if it's true, but I've been shown that. So Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and all the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Canaan's what we now call Israel. And when they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Now, Shechem is, I think it's Nablus in Israel. It's in the West Bank. You can look it up. I think it's Nablus. I might be wrong on that, but anyway, he goes to Canaan, to this oak tree at Moreh, and there he sojourns. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he's going to give him Canaan. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And from there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So he's building an altar at Bethel, and later on his grandson, Jacob, is going to have also visions of angels, and he's going to see the ladder going up and down. Bethel, this is Bethel, the house of the Lord. It's a terrible place and all that. That's further on in the book of Genesis. But Abraham himself has built an altar there to mark this new covenant, this new oath that God has given him. God has promised him this. So he's building an altar to God and saying, right, well, here's the altar to mark the covenant you made with me, that you promised me these things. So, and then he moves on to Bethel. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord, and Abram journeyed on, still going towards the Negev. Now the Negev is the Negev desert, and that's where Abraham is going to settle. He's going to settle at a place called Beersheba, which is now a city. It's in the south of Israel, in the Negev desert. I think that means the city of the well or something like that. Jumping on to chapter 15, we get a covenant of Abraham, and I'm going to skip to that. Right, I'll go back a little bit. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Fear not, Abraham, I am your shield, your reward shall be very great. But Abraham said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you the land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. That's pretty strange, isn't it? And he brought him all these. Cut them in half, that's the animals, and laid each half over against the others. But he did not cut the birds in half, so they went on whole. And when birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. And as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abraham, and behold, a dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abraham, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I'll bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So this is a prophecy for the Israelites going to Egypt and staying there for 400 years, and then being taken out into the desert. I'm not sure if it was 4 generations. I don't think 400 years would be 4 generations, but they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. So there could conceivably be 4 decades as a generation. Perhaps you have a new generation every decade. And then they were going to go back into Israel or Canaan, and they'd take possession. And when the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt, that's the Nile, to the great river, the river Euphrates. So the river Euphrates flows down from Turkey, eastern Turkey. It goes down through Syria and into Iraq. It flows down and it joins up with the Tigris or Tigris, just above the Persian Gulf. So he's promising him all this part of Syria and west of the Euphrates and east from the Nile is going to belong to his descendants. And that's what really upsets the Arabs today. They say Israel is going to claim our land. Their flag has the 6-pointed star of Israel, and 2 blue lines on it represent the 2 rivers, and they want to conquer all of this. We've got to deal with them now while we still can. What they're forgetting is that this promise was made to Abraham And Abraham is, yes, he's the father of the Jews and the Israelites, but he's also the father of the Arabs. So that prophecy can be fulfilled with the Arabs living in the Arab lands and the Jews living in the Jewish lands. So that is not an impossibility, you know. It doesn't mean that Israel is going to claim part of Egypt and part of Syria and all of Jordan, and you know, it doesn't mean that. It's a promise made to the overlord, the over-patriarch, Abraham, who's the father of them all. So I just wanted to make that point. Now we're going to go to Hagar. Now, Hagar, Abraham's wife, Sarah, I mean, he's 75 when he leaves Ur of the Chaldees, which is the city we now call Urfa. It used to be called Edessa in Greco-Roman times, and the name has been changed back to Urfa, or Sanli Urfa they call it. I think that means something like Urfa the Magnificent, or something like that. I don't know Turkish. Anyway, he was 75 when he left there, and his wife was 10 years younger than him, Sarah, so she's 65. So they're both old people when they leave there, or by our standards, not by his standards. He's going to live to be 175. So he's got another century to go of his life, and she too, an awful lot of years. I don't know how many exactly, but anyway, they come out of there, and she has a problem. She hasn't got children, and eventually she says to Abraham, look, you need an heir. I can't do it for you. I have a servant girl, Hagar. Go into her and produce an heir, and you know that will satisfy that. Well, as you can imagine, this causes problems. Yeah, Abraham does as he tells him, and the servant girl Hagar conceives, but she gets a bit cocky. You know, she's looking down a little bit. She's not behaving as she should in the eyes of this princess. I believe Sarah means princess. So she's not behaving with the right sort of, yes ma'am, she's starting to look a bit, I'm going to be the mother of the next king sort of thing. So Sarah's being a bit bitchy towards her, and Hagar runs away, and an angel appears to her. Now, I find that. And then it goes on here. The angel of the Lord found her, that's Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur, S-H-U-R. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. And I've written down here what Ishmael. Oh, Ishmael means God hears. So Ishmael means God hears. So God's heard her prayers. Ishmael is going to be the name of her son. God has heard her prayers. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So he's going to go away. He's going to be living away from his kinsmen, and he's a bit of a wild man. We later hear that he's going to be an archer, which suggests that he's a hunter. He's not a farmer, he's a hunter. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly, here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Bir Lachai Roy, which means well of the living one who sees me. So the well she's been sitting at is called the well of the one who hears me. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called his name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So that's 10 years after he's left Ur of the Chaldees, or the Chaldees. Now, the next bit. Yes, we then have in chapter 19, I'm not going to read this out to you, but we have the destruction of Sodom. Sodom was one of 5 cities, and Abraham had actually saved them at one point. They had been attacked by a confederation of kings from the north who had conquered them and taken away their possessions, their wives, their servants and so on. Abraham had raised his men and chased after the other people, the kings of the north, and he had defeated them and brought back all these people to Sodom and the other cities along with their treasures. But he refused to be given any payment for that. He did it for Lot, who was living there. And he said, I don't want to be beholden to you. I don't want you to say I got my wealth from you. I haven't. So he doesn't take anything from them for doing that. But the people of Sodom continued in evil ways, and the story then comes of 3 men who first appear at Beersheba and come to Abraham's tent. And these are clearly angels. He prepares a special feast for them, gets bread cooked, slaughtered a calf or a sheep, etc. And they make certain prophecies to him as well. I must see if I can find that for you. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Then Abraham fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant with you, and behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, which means father of nations, or father of peoples or something. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you, throughout the generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said to Abraham, As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. So he sets up a covenant, and the circumcision rite is brought in then as a sign of this covenant between God and Abraham. Actually, the Egyptians used to practice circumcision too. So perhaps that was a sign of a covenant that they had in earlier times. I'll leave that with you. Anyway, then God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. So there's going to be nations out of Sarah, as well as the nations from Ishmael and Hagar. So it's not just one nation, it's nations. And we'll come back to that in later lectures. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And God said, No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. So, the people of Ishmael, they're going to be a nation with 12 nations descended from 12 sons of Ishmael. And they're all named later on in the book of Genesis. But God says he's established this covenant with Abraham's son Isaac. And Isaac is going to be the father of Jacob. Jacob has his name changed to Israel. So this kind of prophetic strain that's been coming down is going to go through Israel. And that's the inheritance of the Jews. But not only the Jews, there are other Israelites in this world. And we'll talk about that another time. But when I first went to Israel in 1972, I met an old man there. He had a very well-thumbed Bible. I was working in a youth hostel at the time, making the breakfast and the dinner for people. Little job I had to get a bit of pocket money. And I noticed this man who was always sitting in the corner on his own. No one would speak to him. Most of the other people were young, you know. They were on the way to kibbutzim, or there were pilgrims travelling through. But they're mostly young. There were a few older ones, but they were mostly young, staying in the hostel. And this old man would sit in the corner with his Bible, and they all kind of shunned him. And I thought, I'm very curious about this man. I'm going to go and talk to him. So I found an excuse and went up to talk to him. And I said, oh, it's very interesting. I see you really study your Bible. It's so interesting being in Israel now that they have returned. And he looked at me sternly and he said, Judah has returned, but Israel not yet. And I said, what? You do realise that Judah and Israel are something, not the same thing. Well, I said, they're all the same, aren't they? And he said, no, there were 12 tribes and they had the split in the kingdom. And he showed me the place in the Bible where it talked about it. And he said the Jews are descended from Judah. And Judah was the southern kingdom. There was only 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, along with the Levitical priests. The other 10 tribes were in another northern kingdom, which took the name Israel, and they were carried off by the Assyrians. They haven't returned yet, he said. Only the Jews have. So he showed me many other things in the Bible. I won't go into those now, but this promise actually belongs to more than just the Jews, of the covenant of Abraham with Isaac. So then it says here, Isaac was born in chapter 21. Well, I'll start at verse 5. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. Apparently Isaac means laughter. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. And then it goes on here, and the child grew and was weaned. So weaned means being taken off the breast. He started to eat solid food. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, so they're still there at this point, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. Ishmael's his son too. He doesn't want to cast him out. But, he said to Sarah, earlier on, he said, you do with this woman, she's your slave, you do what you want. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Now, his offspring are going to be named the Israelites, and the Israelites descend from Jacob, who comes from Isaac. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman, that's Ishmael, also, because he is your offspring. So they're going to be a nation too. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. The child is only about 1 or 2 at this stage. He's still a young boy. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So she's out there in the Negev. And when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. So there's some bushes there. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. That's interesting they use that term, bow shot, because he's going to be an archer. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from the heavens, and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. So she's getting this promise again. This son, they're not going to die in the desert. He's going to become a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So a well of water appears. There they are, thirsty. They need a drink. She's given up. But there a well appears, and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness, and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran. And his mother took a wife from him from the land of Egypt. So remember, Hagar herself is an Egyptian, right? So she's now a single mother. She's got a child to raise, and she marries him off to an Egyptian woman. So he's becoming more and more Egyptian, or his descendants are. And she would presumably speak Egyptian, and he would learn her language. You always learn the language of your mother, because she's the one that's rocking the cradle. So she maybe spoke Hebrew as well, I don't know, probably. But she certainly spoke Egyptian, and she would have remembered the ways of ancient Egypt. Now, I've told you of how Abraham, when he had his covenant with God, the first thing he does is build an altar as a witness. And then later in the Bible, we hear the story of Jacob, and Jacob goes to Bethel, the same area as Abraham had been in, and he has the vision. He puts his head down on a stone, and he has a vision of angels going up and down a ladder, and God speaks to him and changes his name and all of that. He goes twice to Bethel, and he has dreams both times. And he raises a stone, the stone he'd been lying on, his pillow, into a pillow, and pours oil on it, because God has made promises to him. So this is another covenant stone. So this is the idea that when you make an oath, a covenant, whether with God or with someone else, and in the Bible they do this with other people, they raise stones to mark boundaries between this is my territory and that's your territory, so that they swear on it, and they shake hands, and they have a feast or whatever. The stones have witnessed it. So with Jacob, that stone witnessed the covenant he had with God. So that becomes Jacob's pillow stone. It's supposedly the one we have in the throne in England now. Now, she knows all about this. She also knows in ancient Egypt they had a covenant stone they called the Ben stone, and it was kept in Heliopolis. So she knows about covenant stones. Everyone used to do this when they, with their religion. You swear an oath to God, you get the stone to witness it, so that every time you look on that stone, or your descendants look on it, they remember the oath that was sworn. That's the idea of the stone. The stone will last. If you made it of wood, it will rot away, but stone will last. So what do you think she's going to do? Well, I think the first thing she's going to do is she's going to pick up a local stone from where this promise was made to her. And she's going to put it in a handbag or whatever, probably a small piece, as a witness to what was said to her. Now, I believe this is the origin of the stone we see today in the Kaaba, the black stone. It's a stone of witness between the people of Ishmael, the people descended from Hagar, with God and his promise that he'd make them into a great nation or a company of nations, 12 nations. So that's, the origins really of what makes Mecca holy. But there's more to it than this. When people have tried to find and doing archaeology at Mecca, they found nothing earlier than about, I think, the 8th century, 7th, 8th century, late 7th. Nothing. There's no signs of any Hagar and Ishmael, or heaven forbid, Adam and Eve having lived there. It's in the middle of, or not the middle, it's in the desert in Saudi Arabia. There's nothing there. Everything has to be brought there. There's no trees, there's no lovely stream running through it. There's, it's not an ideal place, except as a refuge if you're running away. And this is something that struck a guy called Dan Gibson, but he's lived in Arabia for most of his life. And, he lives with the Arabs, he knows them very well, and he's researched the origins of Islam and where is Mecca. He didn't believe that Mecca was originally where it is now. And what he pinpointed was that he analysed where the very earliest mosques, and there are a number of mosques that were founded very early on in Islam. Muhammad died in 632, so within the few years from there, quite a lot of mosques were built in different places, very old ones, but they would align them to face Mecca. And so he went to check. He went to these mosques, the ones he could get access to, and you have a wall. You have to have a particular wall that faces towards Mecca, so that when you're bowing in prayer, you're bowing in the right direction. And if it's an existent building, they build a niche into that building which gives you the direction you have to pray. So if you're in England, say, they'll have niches in their mosques facing towards Mecca. They'll have the same in Turkey. They'll have the same in India. They'll be facing by the compass different directions, but they're supposed to point towards Mecca. Well, he found something very interesting. He found that these walls, these niche walls, were facing towards Petra. He thought they were going to face towards Jerusalem, because people are told that Jerusalem was the original place that they were going to face, but once they worked it out, they had them facing Mecca. Well, it wasn't Jerusalem at all, it was Petra. And where's Petra? Petra's in Jordan. I've been there twice actually. It's an amazing place. You've probably seen pictures of it, the Red City of Petra, and you've got this carved in the rock, amazing building. They call it the Treasury. I think it was probably more like a temple of some sort. And you go down and through a very narrow entrance and down a steep slope down into the city proper, and there's the Treasury, and then you can go off along the way, and it spreads out for miles. And if you follow up that valley, there was a stream flowing through there at one time, and there are houses there, and there are all sorts of grave fronts on the walls, just like in southeast Turkey. The Carian tombs in the cliff face you see. And you see loads of these all along the walls there, these cliffside tombs. And they're all different in style. And they would have belonged to particular families. So you thought, oh, that's interesting, that's very strange. And if you go along, as I say, you find ruins, there's other temples, there's all sorts of stuff there. Anyway, Dan Gibson realised that this must be the real original Mecca. And I must say, when I first went there, that was the impression I had. I said, they tell us this place was built by Nabateans, but the period they're talking about, just after the Roman Empire, that's Muslim time. This looks a very wealthy, rich city. It must be something Muslim. I didn't quite put my finger on it, this is Mecca. But he found that that's where these different things were, these different mosques were faced towards. So why aren't they facing that way now? Well, in 656, now Muhammad died in 632, and then there were a series of caliphs, the Rashidun Caliphate, right? That's the original caliphate. There were a series of 5 caliphs, I believe. And then there was a civil war between the Rashidun caliphs. The last one was called Ali, and he moved it to what's now in Iraq. And there was a civil war between the Rashidun the Caliphate, and the people of Damascus, who formed a council based on studying Muhammad's teachings. The others were more concerned with lineage and the lineage of Muhammad. And there was a civil war which still goes on to this day. The ones who believed in the lineage from Muhammad, were the Shiites, and the others were the Sunnis. So the Sunnis actually defeated the Shiites, and the new caliphate was set up at Damascus, and it's called the Umayyad Caliphate. So that battle went on between 656 to 660, and Dan Gibson found evidence that there was a battle in Petra at that time. He actually found the sling stones and the ruins of what must have once been the Kaaba precinct. And what seems to have happened was when the Rashidun people knew that they were going to be, defeated by the more powerful Umayyads, they sent a party of people. They took the stone out of the Kaaba and sent them off down to south to Medina and then on to Mecca, what we now call Mecca, and they re-established there with the stone. So this is Dan Gibson's thesis, and he's made a series of programs on these. Now I know they're being discussed in Islamic circles, and of course it's causing quite an upset, but many people can see that this is actually true. It fits with the history much better, and it actually explains what the Hajj is really all about. That even before the time of Muhammad, people were going to Petra for meetups once a year. The Arabs were going there. And you can imagine, the big marketplace, they buy and sell stuff, but more importantly, they get to meet their cousins, and they meet their great, more distant relatives. They find wives and husbands. And, it's very important, but the Arab civilization was dispersed. They were desert people, and many of them were living on the outskirts of big cities. They were traders, with the camel trains going out. And to them, the desert was not an obstacle. They knew where the waterholes were. They knew how to navigate it. It's a bit like the British going out overseas and treating the Atlantic Ocean not as a barrier but as a highway. And if you've got the ships and you know what you're doing, you can do that. And the Arabs were just like that with their camel trains, that they could go out places that the Romans and Persians and people were scared stiff of. They wouldn't go out into the desert. If they wanted to trade something, they would get the Arabs to do it for them, and vice versa. So the Arabs set up this trading network all over the ancient world. But when they died, they would want to be buried back in the homeland, in Petra, where Hagar had taken Ishmael. And that's why you have all these tombs up on the hillside. Now, I said this to my wife. I said, they must have brought the bodies back. She said, well, they'd smell a bit, wouldn't they? Well, they probably did the same thing as the Jews used to do, which is you put the body in some kind of sepulchre initially, and then you let it rot down, and then you go in there a couple of years later and you take the bones out and wash them, put them in something else, and they would take the bones back and bury those in Petra. I don't think they'd take the rotting corpse back, but they'd take the bones back to the ancestral cave, which is the right place to bury them. It makes sense, just like the Jews would do on the Mount of Olives. So it makes sense to me that was the original Mecca. And once you realise that, it takes the pressure off Jerusalem to be the most important thing of all for the Arabs. It's not. Their holy city, the holy city of Hagar and Ishmael, is Petra. And they already know that. It's in Jordan. So I'm going to give you the links to Dan Gibson's programs that he's done, and you can have a look at that, make up your own mind. They're very, very interesting and will give you a lot of information, far more than I have. And I believe that the stone, that she would have picked up a stone as a witness to the promise. I mean, if you had an angel turn up and tell you all this, wouldn't you want to say, well, who's going to believe I'll take this stone as a witness to what will happen to me? And that becomes a sacred relic. Of course it does. And she puts it into an enclosure, which becomes the Kaaba, and later on it's taken to Mecca, where it still is today. And so we begin to see how these things network together, and how the Arabs and Israelis, or Israelites, actually have a common origin in Abraham, and they need to get together. They need to make their peace eventually. And they will do. And they also need to make peace with Christianity, and I'll come to that in the next lecture, because the pyramid, which comes out of Egypt, had the three symbols sitting on top of it in my dream, or in my vision. The symbols of Islam, of Judaism and Christianity conjoined together on top of the pyramid, because Egypt is the origin of all of them. So thank you very much. I'll come back to you with the next lecture as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow. It might have to wait till next week, but I'll see what I can do. So thank you again. Bye-bye.